What's up, quarantines? Here to talk briefly about the era of good feelings. Reminded me of a time I had some good feelings back in the courtyard of the school, and I was standing there, and one of the new teachers that I didn't know real well yet was standing at the bottom of the stairs, and he was like nervous, and I said, "Hey, listen, guy, there's no reason to be nervous. Um, they're just kids, they're not going to hurt you on the first day." And he was like, "No, it's not that. It's just these stairs." And I'm like, "Well, the stairs aren't going to hurt you either." And he goes, "Oh, I don't know. They're always up to something." Better times when we could actually go to school. Okay, so we're here not at school, but we are going to talk a little bit today about some learning opportunities, which is specifically reviewing time period 4 so that we're getting ready for this AP exam that is still happening. So we're going to talk about the era of good feelings for about a little bit of time here, just to review some facts that you guys, I hope like some of it tickles your brain, you remember a little bit. But as we go over these facts, it'd be helpful if you like took notes. I know we're working on trying to get you guys' notebooks out of the school, so maybe take new notes as we're doing some of these review lectures. So let's talk about the era of good feelings right now. So the era of good feelings starts at the end of the War of 1812. Now, just a word about where we're at in like historical context. Time period 4 starts with Jefferson's presidency, and there's a previous lecture about Jeffersonian democracy. And so Jefferson's presidency ends in like an economic disaster with the Embargo Act of 1807. James Madison takes over. Madison is Jefferson's protege. And so when James Madison takes over, he basically is like a continuation of Jefferson's like major policies. And he also inherited a lot of Jefferson's problems, namely the impressment of American Navy men by British ships. And so the impressment of Americans, that's not, wow, Britain, cool boat. That's Britain telling American soldiers that they're kidnapped and they're now a part of the British Navy. So kidnapping Americans on the high seas, not respecting the autonomy of American shipping. And so, this ongoing impressment, wow, was ultimately what led James Madison to, to defend America on the high seas. Now, notably, Napoleon is like trying to take over the world in Europe, and so Great Britain was like pretty well distracted with that problem, and so James Madison also like thought this might be an opportunity to get a quick dub. The War of 1812 is sometimes called Mr. Madison's War. It's noteworthy that the Federalist Party is against the War of 1812 from the beginning. They do not want to fight it. The Federalist Party, keep in mind, was centered in the northeast part of the United States, and a lot of Federalists were like big into the merchant area. They were pro-manufacturing, they were pro-trade, and so a lot of times their policies looked very pro-British because Federalists in the northeast part of the country of the United States at that time benefited a lot with a robust trade relationship between Great Britain and the United States. So they did not want to fight a war with Great Britain. They benefited from our relationship with Great Britain. But James Madison, again, this ongoing impressment, wow, of American soldiers on the high seas, and also the fact that Great Britain wouldn't leave forts in the northern part of our country, that was an ongoing problem. So eventually we declare war, we fight a war. The War of 1812 is a silly war. A lot of people did we win the War of 1812? That maybe is aggressive, but we didn't lose. And so that's probably the most important distinction. The War of 1812, basically we end where we started. It wasn't like a resounding military victory by any stretch of the imagination. However, it was a military not lost by a lot of ways. And more important to the War of 1812 is the way it helps form this national identity. So like some trivia things, we won a naval battle, Old Ironsides. That's like a thing of naval lore, that we won a battle against the best Navy in the world at the time. So like that was a cause for victory. Fort McHenry was attacked. The Star Spangled Banner was written during the War of 1812. Also, our capital was burned down during the War of 1812, which is unfortunate, but like a lot of stories and lore came out of it, like the way Dolly Madison saved the portrait of George Washington. And also, a young general by the name of Andrew Jackson got famous fighting in the War of 1812, specifically at the Battle of New Orleans, which incidentally was fought after the war was already over. But you guys, if you remember the song, in 1814, took a little trip along Colonel Jackson down the mighty Mississippi. Took a little bacon and we took a little beans, and we fought the bloody British in the town of New Orleans. That's Johnny Horton, if you care to Google it. So Andrew Jackson, a thing of lore, got a lot of notoriety fighting in the Battle of New Orleans during the War of 1812. So the Treaty of Ghent ends the War of 1812. Also, the War of 1812 ends the Federalist Party because people felt a lot of national vigor after the War of 1812 ended. Like, we didn't lose, y'all. We fought a war against this preeminent international superpower, the British, and we didn't lose. I mean, I don't know that like we could say we won, but we didn't lose. And so people were feeling really great about being an American, and the Federalists, who were opposed to the war all along, ended up not looking so hot about the whole thing. So the War of 1812 ends the Federalist Party, and what it ultimately does is it kicks off the Era of Good Feelings, which is named such mostly because there was only one party in control of the country during James Monroe's presidency. So the War of 1812 ends, and the Democrat-Republicans are now the only party to speak of in the United States. In 1816, James Monroe is elected. He's also a Democrat-Republican. So he's going to continue, this party is going to continue to dominate. The party of Jefferson is going to continue to dominate American politics. But what's significant about this time period is that the Federalists are dead now. Because they opposed the War of 1812, they don't exist anymore, which means as a party, which means that there's no like organized political party to argue with the Democrat Republicans that are now in control of the presidency and of the entire political landscape of our country. And so something noteworthy to discuss, though, and we're going to ask this question at the end of this lecture, is how aptly named the Era of Good Feelings was. And we'll get back to that here at the end. But when we talk about like this political party dominating American politics, if some of you like have a little itch of tyranny in the back of your head that, we just got rid of this autonomous government with only one single person controlling everything and having like a single party, that sounds like a little bit tyranny-ish. And so I think a good question to ask ourselves is, how much do the Democrat-Republicans assert themselves on this political stage, and how much did they just kind of adopt a lot of the ideas of the Federalist Party that the Federalists, are dead now? Did they just adopt those policies? Is that why there was no opposition? Or is it because they were so politically strong they didn't have to have any opposition? So let's take a look at that really quickly. One of the cornerstones of the Federalist Party had to do with Henry Clay's American system. Henry Clay's American system had three main parts to it. We remembered it with the acronym BIT. So there was the Bank of the U.S. So Federalists are in favor of the national bank, right? Federalists are people who are comfortable with a strong central government, and they're in favor of the national bank, right? They are loose constructionists. They believe that the federal government has implied powers, and the national bank is one of those things. So BIT, Henry Clay's American system starts with BIT, B, the Bank of the U.S., the Bank of the U.S. President Monroe and President I'm sorry, President Monroe did not get rid of the Bank of the U.S. He adopted it. He said, yes, we are cool with the Bank of the U.S. We're going to continue on with that bank. So in that way, the Democrat Republicans adopted a federalist policy. Second part of Henry Clay's American system, which is the federalist political agenda, essentially, is has to do with internal improvements. You could also think of the word infrastructure. So Federalists believed that the national government should be doing things to promote improved infrastructure, like the U.S. government should be building roads and canals and just doing internal improvements to connect all of these new states and this like budding market economy. So BIT, the Bank of the U.S., yes, internal improvements is the second part of Henry Clay's American system. The third part of Henry Clay's American system is tariffs, is a protective tariff, because Federalists were pro-manufacturing. Keep in mind, Hamilton was a person who thought we should be pro-manufacturing. And Jefferson, the leader of the Democrat Republicans, he believed in an agrarian democracy. He believed that the yeoman farmer was the most virtuous kind of citizen that we could have. And so Democrat Republicans are opposed to protective tariffs. Protective tariffs are not good for farmers. Protective tariffs make the cost of goods go up sometimes. And if you're a farmer and you rely on markets to purchase your goods, then you're not in favor of protective tariffs. Protective tariffs are really good to promote manufacturing. Because if you are a blanket manufacturer in the United States and you're competing against blankets that are made in Europe, and the United States institutes a protective tariff, which would put a tax on imports. So here you are, an American blanket maker, selling your blankets in America, and now European blankets have a tax put on them, and that makes the European blankets more expensive than the American blanket. Then the American blankets are more likely to get purchased in stores. So American manufacturing is getting a little boost. They're getting a competitive edge against European manufacturers. And so protective tariffs is good for manufacturing. That's very much a Federalist idea. That was Hamilton's plan for our country in the future. And so, interestingly enough, the tariff of 1816, which was implemented by President Monroe, a Democrat Republican, was a protective tariff. So back to Henry Clay's American system, which is a summary of Federalist policy. There is B, the Bank of the U.S., which the Democrat Republicans did. There's I, which was internal improvements or infrastructure. And there's T, which is tariffs, protective tariff, which the Democrat Republicans also did. So the only thing that Democratic Republicans put their foot down and said, no, we're not going to do is infrastructure improvements. And there was a push for that in Congress. The bonus bill was passed notably by John Calhoun. He was interested in promoting those infrastructure improvements, but the Democrat Republicans wouldn't get involved with it. So even though, they instituted these other Federalist ideas like keeping the Bank of the U.S. and instituting this protective tariff, they drew their lines at the infrastructure improvements that they just didn't do that. So it's an interesting discussion. We have this. Is this a single party politics situation? Yes. But is it the hegemony of a single party, or is it evidence that that one party was willing to make concessions with the opposition party behind the scenes rather than this party feeling the need to organize and run against them? So the era of good feelings looks good from a political perspective, right? I mean, there is compromise that is happening. There is productive legislation. Even though it's a single party system, that party is making compromises, making concessions, is doing things with the other party. Although that party is formally dead, they've adopted a lot of those policies. So it's not like single party hegemony. It feels like single party peace, right? That's so nice. Compromise, concessions. Wow, amazing. Let's think about this from an economic perspective, though, because this is the era of good feelings. It's supposed to last until 1824. However, there's a panic in 1819 that is an economic catastrophe. And, gasp, it's caused by the Bank of the U.S. So the Democrat Republicans had adopted this bank, had allowed this bank to continue on, had put it in their policy, even though the founding of the Democratic Republican Party, Thomas Jefferson, who was initially opposed to the bank, it caused all this trouble. The bank overspeculated on lands out west. It caused a lot of Western banks to foreclose on Western farmers. This Panic of 1819 was disastrous, especially for people in the western part of our country. There was one notable person who was impacted negatively by the Panic of 1819 caused by the National Bank, and his name was Andrew Jackson. We're going to talk about him later. And so, how good can the era of good feelings be if there's like this significant economic catastrophe, the Panic of 1819? And then, sounds fun that we're all moving west and that the United States has access to these Western lands because they finally, asserted themselves against the British Empire. Really great. However, all of that Western movement puts this new stress on the American political system in the form of, do we allow for the expansion of the institution of slavery? Because that's already an issue. And the Missouri Compromise, which happens in 1820, alludes to the fact that all is not well in the era of good feelings. The tensions over the expansion of slavery into new territories like Missouri leads to the necessity of the Missouri Compromise, which is brokered by Henry Clay. Second time we've mentioned him in this lecture. Very interesting. Won't be the last. Henry Clay is the great compromiser, and he comes up with, the idea that states in the South will become slave states, states in the North will become free states. We're going to maintain that balance of power for the next 30 years until until it works, until it doesn't work anymore. And 30 years on to American history, it's not going to work anymore. But the Missouri Compromise brokers that tenuous peace between northern and southern states. Missouri is admitted as a slave state. Maine is admitted as a free state. And now, we're all happy again. However, how good can the era of good feelings be if we have this much tension centered around the institution of slavery? So a lot to think about here. Single party hegemony, single party power, or a party willing to make a lot of concessions and compromises on their initial beliefs to begin with. A lot to think about in terms of who Henry Clay was with his American system, which really formed a lot of policy in the era of good feelings, and also talk about forming policy in the era of good feelings. That Missouri Compromise is a really big deal. It's going to be the number one policy concerning the institution of slavery for the next 30 years in American politics. And then when it's not working anymore, then we have basically a steep road to the Civil War. So the Missouri Compromise staves off the fracturing of our country for 30 years. However, what does it say about the era of good feelings that we need that compromise to begin with? And are we just pushing off the inevitable? And do we really like each other? Not to mention the economic turmoil from the Panic of 1819. How good can the era of good feelings be if there's all of that economic turmoil? Last but not least, to make a plug for the good in the era of good feelings, America is indeed dominating itself and asserting itself on the international stage. The Monroe Doctrine is issued during Monroe's presidency, which asserts America as a power. We say, listen, the Western Hemisphere is our hemisphere. We're riding a high from old Ironsides. And you can keep the colonies. Europe can keep the colonies that they already have, but they're not allowed to expand anymore into the Western Hemisphere. Whatever colonies they have established, they can keep established, but there's no more European expansion in the Western Hemisphere. It's just too risky from an American security perspective. And so maybe that's an argument that era of good feelings is good, that America is finally able to assert itself on an international scale. The struggles of the Adams presidency and the Jefferson presidency, and to a certain extent the Madison presidency, of the the American military struggling to assert itself against foreign influence, especially on the high seas, is finally coming to an end. And the Monroe Doctrine asserts America as like a power in its own right, at least in this side of the world. So the Era of Good Feelings. How good was it? That's up to you to decide. When we continue on, we're going to talk about what ends the Era of Good Feelings, which is called by, the term is coined by Andrew Jackson, and we're going to refer to it as the corrupt bargain. So the Era of Good Feelings, a time of peace, a time of turmoil, maybe a little bit of both. Should we call it the Era of Good Feelings? How lucky is James Monroe that that's what his presidency is known as? Man, I hope that's what people remember my class as. The class of good feelings. A girl can dream. All right, quarantines. Take care of yourselves. We'll see you tomorrow. Or later, I guess. You can see me whenever you want to. It's a video. Bye.